3 a.m. The basement corridors of one of the world's most prestigious museums. Security cameras show nothing but empty hallways and the rhythmic patrol of a night guard making his rounds. But on this particular night, something is different. A door that should be locked, a door that has been locked for decades, stands slightly open. The guard approaches slowly. His flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing a staircase leading down. Not on any official floor plan, not in any security briefing he ever received. Just stone steps descending into blackness, worn smooth by footsteps from another age. He descends. The air grows colder with each step. At the bottom, another door. This one marked only with a faded label. Uncatalogued, acquisitions restricted access. Inside, the beam of his flashlight sweeps across shelves that stretch into darkness, and what he sees there will haunt him for the rest of his life. Stone tablets covered in writing that predates any known language. Metallic objects that gleam without tarnish, despite carbon dating that puts them at over 20,000 years old. Astronomical instruments of impossible precision, their mechanisms more complex than anything produced until the 20th century. Tools made from alloys that modern metallurgists cannot identify or reproduce. But it is the maps that stop him cold. Maps showing coastlines that have been underwater for 12,000 years. Maps depicting Antarctica without ice. Maps that should not exist. 3 days later, that security guard no longer works at the museum. The door at the end of the basement corridor has been sealed with concrete, and the official statement reads simply, "Routine structural renovation." But he took photographs. And those photographs raise a question that institutions around the world have spent centuries trying to suppress. What if everything we have been taught about human history is wrong? What if the pyramids, the megaliths, the impossible stonework scattered across every continent? What if these are not the achievements of our ancestors, but the remnants of civilizations that came before? Civilizations that rose to heights we are only now beginning to reach. Civilizations that fell so completely that we do not even remember their names. What if we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth? What if we are not even the second or third? What if we are the seventh? Tonight, you are going to see evidence that has been hidden in museum vaults, dismissed by academics, and systematically erased from the historical record. Evidence carved in stone, written in our DNA, encoded in myths that span every culture on Earth. Evidence that suggests human civilization is far, far older than we have been told. You are going to see structures that should not exist, built with technology we cannot explain. You are going to hear about knowledge that ancient people should not have possessed. And you are going to discover why those in power have worked so hard to keep you from asking these questions. Because once you see what I am about to show you, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand the pattern, you will recognize it everywhere. And you will realize that the story of humanity is not a story of constant progress from primitive to advanced. It is a story of cycles, rise and fall, civilization and catastrophe, memory and amnesia. We are living in the recovery phase, rebuilding what was lost 12,000 years ago when the last cycle ended in fire and flood, and the evidence of what came before is all around us if you know where to look. Hey, I am Mr. H, and if you are as fascinated by these mysteries as I am, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This journey into our forgotten past is just beginning, and you will not want to miss what we uncover next. Trust me, the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. The museum vault I just described? That is not fiction. Similar rooms exist in institutions around the world. Artifacts that do not fit the narrative. Discoveries that cannot be explained. Objects labeled simply origin unknown. Because the truth would require rewriting every history textbook ever printed. And that truth is about to become impossible to ignore. Let us begin with the evidence they cannot hide. The evidence too massive to bury. Too widespread to dismiss. The evidence written in stone. There are places on Earth that should not exist. Structures carved from solid bedrock with a precision that defies explanation. Engineering feats that modern technology struggles to replicate. And when you ask archaeologists how these were created, you get the same answer every time. Ancient workers with copper tools and unlimited time. But that answer stops making sense the moment you actually look at the evidence. Let's start in China. 1992. A farmer in Zhejiang province decides to pump water from what he thinks is a natural pond. The water level drops, and keeps dropping, until finally, the pond drains completely, revealing a perfectly carved staircase descending into the earth. He calls the authorities. What they find changes everything. 24 massive artificial caves carved directly into solid siltstone. Not dug, not excavated with tunnels and supports, carved from the inside. Each chamber rising to heights of up to 100 feet, pillars left standing to support ceilings, walls meeting at precise 90-degree angles, and every surface covered in a distinctive pattern of chisel marks, except the marks are parallel, uniform, and identical across millions of square feet of stone. The Longyu Caves, that is what they are called today, and they represent an engineering achievement that should be impossible. Geologists estimate that over 1 million cubic meters of rock were removed to create these chambers. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 36 million cubic feet of solid stone, gone, carved away with what official archaeology claims were primitive bronze tools during the reign of an ancient Chinese emperor. But here is the problem. Bronze is softer than siltstone. Trying to carve siltstone with bronze is like trying to cut steel with aluminum. The tool gives out long before the stone does. And even if you somehow had enough bronze tools, thousands of them, constantly being replaced, you still face the mathematical impossibility. Engineers who have studied the Longyu Caves estimate it would take 1,000 workers over 6 years to excavate just one of these chambers using modern equipment, pneumatic drills, diamond-tipped saws, industrial machinery. That is one chamber. There are 24, and no evidence of any excavated rock. Over 1 million cubic meters of stone simply vanished. No debris piles, no rubble fields, nothing. The Chinese government's official explanation? Imperial Construction Project. That is it. No details, no timeline, no explanation for how it was physically accomplished. And when independent researchers ask for permission to conduct dating tests or detailed surveys, those requests are quietly denied. The Longyu Caves are not unique. They are part of a pattern. Beneath the waters off the coast of Japan lies the Yonaguni Monument, discovered in 1986 by a dive instructor who thought he was looking at a natural rock formation until he saw the right angles. The steps, the carved channels and terraces that descend over 75 feet to the seafloor. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura has spent decades studying Yonaguni. His conclusion? Artificial, man-made, and based on the geology and sea level data, it was carved when this area was above water, which means it is at least 10,000 years old, maybe older. 10,000 years. That predates the pyramids by 6,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. It predates every major civilization we acknowledge in the history books. And yet, there it sits, carved stone, precise angles, deliberate architecture. The skeptics say it is natural. Wave erosion, tectonic shifting, random geological processes that just happen to create flat surfaces, sharp corners, and symmetrical staircases. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you, or rather, an underwater monument. But Yonaguni is not alone either. Off the coast of Gujarat, India, sonar surveys in the Gulf of Cambay have revealed what appears to be an enormous city under 120 feet of water. Grid patterns, structural foundations, geometric shapes that do not occur in nature. And when researchers brought up artifacts from the site, carbon dating put some of them at 9,500 years old. 9,500 years. That is before the invention of writing, before agriculture supposedly spread across the Indian subcontinent, before any civilization we recognize should have existed. And yet, there is a city, underwater, organized, planned, built. You start to see the pattern now. Advanced structures, impossible dates, and all of them submerged. Because something happened around 12,000 years ago. Something catastrophic. Geologists call it Meltwater Pulse 1A, the end of the last ice age. Miles-thick glaciers covering North America and Europe melted in what geological terms call an instant meaning over just a few centuries. Sea levels rose 400 feet. Coastlines that had been home to human civilizations for thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. And that is where the evidence is. Underwater, out of sight, conveniently inaccessible. Which is exactly where you would expect to find the remains of advanced coastal civilizations if they existed before the flood. But not all the evidence is underwater. Some of it is so massive, so undeniable, that it has been sitting in plain sight for millennia, and we still cannot explain it. Baalbek, Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter, built by the Romans, according to every guidebook and history text, except the Romans, built on top of something much, much older, something they did not understand and could not replicate. At the foundation of the temple complex sit 3 limestone blocks known as the Trilithon. Each block weighs approximately 800 tons. That is 1,600,000 pounds per stone. They were quarried from a site a quarter-mile away, transported across uneven terrain, lifted 20 feet into the air, and placed with such precision that you cannot fit a piece of paper between them. 800 tons. Modern cranes max out at around 20 tons for mobile units. The largest fixed cranes in the world can lift maybe 2,000 tons under perfect conditions with extensive support structures. The Romans had none of this. Neither did the Phoenicians before them. Neither did anyone in the ancient world we acknowledge. And yet, there the stones sit, perfectly fitted, immovable, mocking every explanation we have been given. In Egypt, buried beneath the Saqqara complex, sit granite boxes known as the Serapeum sarcophagi. 24 boxes carved from solid Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. Each box weighs up to 70 tons, and they are not roughly hewn. They are precision instruments. Engineer Christopher Dunn measured these boxes with laser equipment. The internal corners, the hardest part to carve, are perfectly square. The surface flatness measures within 2/10,000ths of an inch. That is precision tooling. That is machining tolerance. You do not achieve that by pounding away with copper chisels and stone hammers. You achieve that with advanced tools, controlled equipment, and engineering knowledge we claim did not exist 4,000 years ago. But perhaps the most disturbing example sits high in the Bolivian Andes, Puma Punku, a temple complex that looks like it was hit by a bomb. Massive diorite and andesite blocks scattered across the plateau like a child's abandoned toys. Except these are not toys. They are 100-ton stones carved with impossible precision. Diorite is harder than granite. It ranks 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, the same as steel. You cannot carve it with bronze. You cannot shape it with iron. Even modern diamond-tipped tools struggle with diorite. And yet, the blocks at Puma Punku have perfectly flat surfaces, intricate interlocking joints, and geometric patterns that repeat with mechanical accuracy. In 2013, a team of engineers attempted to replicate just one of the simpler Puma Punku blocks using modern equipment: diamond-tipped drills, laser measuring systems, computer-aided design. It took them 3 weeks and $15,000 to produce a crude approximation that did not even come close to the precision of the original. The original, according to archaeologists, was made by people who had not invented the wheel yet, people who supposedly used stone hammers and copper chisels, people who had no written language, no mathematics, no engineering tradition we can identify. Does that make sense to you? Because it should not. These are not isolated examples. They are data points, evidence of a technological capability that existed in deep antiquity, a capability that does not fit the narrative we have been taught, a capability that suggests whoever built these structures had knowledge and tools we are only now beginning to understand. And that raises the most important question of all. If they had this technology, this knowledge, this capability, where did it come from? And more importantly, where did it go? Before we go any further into this mystery, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how this story reaches people across different time zones, whether you're wide awake with your morning coffee or drifting off to sleep on the other side of the planet. It's fascinating to think that right now, people all over the world are discovering the same hidden truths about our past. Now, let's talk about what happened to all that advanced knowledge, because the answer might be written in our very DNA. History, as we have been taught it, is a straight line. Primitive humans in caves, the development of agriculture, the rise of civilization in Mesopotamia and Egypt, Greece and Rome, the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, each step building on the last in an unbroken chain of progress leading to where we are now. It is a comforting story. It makes us feel special, like we are the culmination of everything that came before, the pinnacle of human achievement. But what if that story is wrong? What if history is not a line but a circle? What if human civilization does not progress in a steady upward climb, but rises and falls in repeating cycles? What if we have been here before, many times before, and we simply do not remember? This is not a new idea. It is actually one of the oldest ideas in human history. The ancient Hindus spoke of yugas, cosmic ages, that repeat in endless cycles. 4 ages totaling 4,320,000 years, after which everything resets and begins again. The Greeks had a similar concept. Plato wrote about the Great Year, a cycle of approximately 26,000 years tied to the precession of the equinoxes. The Hopi people of North America speak of 4 previous worlds that were destroyed before our current 5th world began. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia, all describing the same thing: cyclical time, repeating rises and falls, civilizations that came before and were destroyed, mythology, we are told, symbolic stories, spiritual allegories not meant to be taken literally. But what if they were not allegories? What if they were memories? The theory of 7 civilizations, the idea that we are the 7th advanced human culture to rise on this planet, synthesizes data from geology, archaeology, genetics, and comparative mythology. It is not fringe speculation anymore. It is a framework that explains the evidence better than the official timeline does. Let me walk you through it. Civilization number 1. This would have existed roughly 200,000 to 180,000 years ago. We have almost no evidence of this culture because anything they built has been erased by multiple ice ages, continental drift, and 200 millennia of geological change. But we do have evidence that anatomically modern humans existed this far back. And if anatomically modern means modern brains, modern cognitive ability, modern potential, why would they have remained primitive for 190,000 years before suddenly inventing civilization? They would not have. They would have developed just like we did, and then something wiped them out. Civilization number 2, 120,000 to 100,000 years ago, another interglacial period, warmer climate, rising sea levels, ideal conditions for human development. This may have been when the original megalithic knowledge was developed, the understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and stone construction that later cultures tried to recreate. But again, the ice came. The glaciers advanced, and whatever they built was ground to dust beneath miles of ice. Civilization number 3, 75,000 to 60,000 years ago. This one we have slightly better evidence for because of what happened at the end. The Toba supervolcano eruption, the most catastrophic volcanic event in human history. It ejected 800 cubic miles of rock and ash into the atmosphere. Global temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. A volcanic winter lasted 6 to 10 years. And genetic evidence shows that the human population crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals worldwide. That is a bottleneck, a near-extinction event. And when populations crash that severely, you do not just lose people, you lose knowledge, you lose technology, you lose everything except survival skills. The people who made it through Toba were not the scholars, the engineers, the astronomers. They were the hunters, the gatherers, the ones who could find food and water in a world that had gone dark. Civilization 3 died in ash and ice, and the survivors started over from almost nothing. Civilization number 4. This is the big one, 35,000 to 12,000 years ago. This is the civilization that built the structures we are still finding. The megaliths, the pyramids, the precision stonework. This culture existed during the last ice age, but they thrived because they were coastal. Sea levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than today. What is now the continental shelf, vast areas of fertile land, was above water, and that is where they built their cities. We call them Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, different names for the same thing. A global maritime civilization with advanced knowledge of astronomy, navigation, engineering, and possibly technologies we are only beginning to rediscover. They mapped the world. They built monuments encoded with mathematical and astronomical data. They created structures designed to survive cataclysm and preserve knowledge for whoever came after. And then, 12,800 years ago, something hit us. Comet fragments, massive impacts in the North American ice sheet, and possibly the ocean. The evidence is in the geological record now. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, once dismissed as fringe, is now supported by a growing body of scientific data. Nanodiamonds in the sediment layer, iridium anomalies, a black mat of charcoal and debris covering multiple continents, sudden megafauna extinctions, and temperatures that plunged within decades. Civilization 4 did not just decline, it was obliterated. Impact-generated tsunamis hundreds of feet high, wildfires consuming entire continents, massive flooding as ice sheets collapsed, and within 1,000 years, sea levels rose 400 feet, drowning every coastal city, every port, every center of learning that this culture had built. The survivors, and there were survivors, fled to the mountains, to islands, to high ground, and they tried to preserve what they could. But when you are focused on survival, you do not preserve libraries. You preserve food-growing techniques, basic tool-making, fire, shelter, The complex knowledge, the engineering, the mathematics, the cosmology that gets lost. It becomes myth, story, religion. Civilization number 5, 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. These are the post-flood rebuilders. They found the ruins of Civilization 4 and tried to make sense of them. They could not recreate the technology, so they worshipped it instead. They built smaller structures on top of massive foundations they did not understand. They developed cargo cults around the remnants of advanced knowledge. This is where the mystery schools came from. Egyptian priest classes guarding fragments of astronomical and mathematical knowledge they no longer fully understood. Sumerian temples preserving star catalogues and mathematical tablets inherited from the gods who were really just the survivors of Civilization 4, teaching primitives how to restart society. The gods who came from the sea, the culture bringers, the teachers of civilization. They show up in every mythology because they were real. They were the remnants of the previous cycle trying to help the new one begin. Civilization number 6, 3500 BC to around 500 AD. This is what we call ancient history. Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica. These cultures appear fully formed in the archaeological record because they were not starting from zero. They were inheriting knowledge, libraries, oral traditions, structures they could study and measure even if they could not build them anymore. This is why Egyptian engineering peaked with the 4th dynasty and then declined. They were not inventing pyramid construction, they were trying to copy it, and with each generation, the knowledge degraded. The later pyramids are smaller, cruder, less precise. Not because they were learning, but because they were forgetting. And now, civilization number 7. That is us. We appeared after the Bronze Age collapse, after the Dark Ages, after yet another reset, smaller this time, but still devastating. We climbed back up, rediscovered mathematics, astronomy, engineering. We industrialized. We reached for the stars. And we convinced ourselves we were the first to do it. But we are not the first. We are just the latest. And here is what should terrify you. The cycles are not random. They follow a pattern. A 26,000-year pattern tied to Earth's axial precession. Every 12 to 13,000 years, we reach a critical point in this cycle. The point where Earth's magnetic field weakens, where the planet becomes vulnerable to solar events, cosmic impacts, crustal displacement, the point where everything falls apart. We are at that point right now. The last reset was 12,800 years ago. We are overdue. The magnetic poles are shifting faster than at any point in recorded history. The North Magnetic Pole has moved over 1,000 miles in the last century alone. Solar activity is increasing. The Sun operates on its own cycle, an approximately 12,000-year cycle that correlates eerily with the rise and fall of civilizations on Earth. Researchers like Ben Davidson and Douglas Vogt have been warning about this for years. The Sun does not just produce solar flares and coronal mass ejections. It produces periodic micronovas, massive energy releases that scour planetary surfaces, collapse magnetic fields, and cause rapid climate shifts. And the geological record shows it happens like clockwork. The ancients knew this. That is why they built monuments aligned to the stars, why they encoded the precession of the equinoxes into their architecture, why they left warnings in stone. They were not primitive. They were terrified, because they remembered what had happened before, and they knew it would happen again. The 7 civilization theory is not about aliens or Atlantean crystal technology or mystical energy fields. It is about human beings doing what human beings do, building, learning, advancing until the planet itself hits the reset button, and then the survivors start over, climb back up, build again, forget again. We are in the recovery phase right now. We have been for the last 5,000 years. Rebuilding what was lost, rediscovering what was known, and very soon, if the pattern holds, we are going to face the same test that 6 previous civilizations faced. The question is whether we have learned enough from the ruins they left behind to do something different this time, or whether we will just become ruins ourselves, waiting for civilization number 8 to dig us up and wonder how we vanished. If you want to hide a secret for thousands of years, you do not write it down. Paper burns, metal corrodes, digital storage degrades, even clay tablets crumble eventually. But stone endures. And if you know how to work it, stone can speak across millennia. The problem is, we have forgotten how to listen. Across every continent on Earth, there are structures that should not exist according to our understanding of ancient history. Not 1 or 2 anomalies, hundreds of them. and they all share the same impossible characteristics: mathematical precision, astronomical alignment, construction techniques we cannot replicate, and a scale that defies explanation. Let us start with the most obvious question nobody wants to answer. Why are there pyramids everywhere? Egypt, obviously. Everyone knows about Giza. But Mexico has pyramids. Peru has pyramids. China has pyramids, over 300 of them, many still covered in vegetation and officially designated as natural hills by the government. Bosnia has pyramids. Indonesia has what may be the largest and oldest pyramid structure ever discovered. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt. This is not coincidence. This is not independent invention. When cultures separated by oceans build the same structures using the same mathematical ratios, oriented to the same celestial alignments, you are looking at shared knowledge, a common source. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the dimensions of Earth. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter is the same as the ratio of Earth's radius to its circumference. That is not approximate. That is exact to within a fraction of a percent. It also encodes pi, phi, the golden ratio, and the speed of light. Yes, the speed of light, measured in the coordinates of the pyramid's location, 29,97,924,58 degrees north. The speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458. Same numbers. You can call that coincidence if you want, but coincidences stop being coincidences when they keep happening. The Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico, has a base perimeter that is almost identical to the Great Pyramid when you account for the unit of measurement used. The angles are the same, the astronomical alignments are the same, and Teotihuacan was supposedly built by people who had no contact with Egypt, no shared language, no trade routes, no communication whatsoever. And yet, same knowledge, same math, same cosmic understanding. Or let us talk about Gunung Padang in Indonesia. For years, it was dismissed as a natural hill with some stones on top. Then ground-penetrating radar revealed the truth. Beneath the surface, layers of precisely cut chambers, tunnels, and structures extending deep into the mountain. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the deeper layers, 25,000 years old. 25,000 years. That is 3 times older than the pyramids of Egypt, 5 times older than Stonehenge. It predates every civilization we acknowledge, and it is not a crude pile of rocks. It is engineered, intentional, sophisticated. When Indonesian authorities realized what they had found, excavation was halted, access was restricted, and the official narrative became further study required. Translation: we found something that breaks the timeline, so we are going to bury it and pretend it does not exist. But you cannot bury all of it. Some of these structures are too massive, too visible, too undeniable. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in the 1990s, fully excavated starting in the 2000s, and it rewrote everything we thought we knew about the Neolithic period. 11,600 years old. That puts it at the end of the Younger Dryas, right after the cataclysm that destroyed Civilization 4. And this is not a settlement. It is not a village. It is a massive temple complex with T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons each, carved with intricate reliefs of animals, symbols, and geometric patterns. The precision is stunning. The organization is deliberate. And according to the official timeline, it was built by hunter-gatherers who had not yet invented pottery, writing, or agriculture. Hunter-gatherers do not build 20-ton temples. They do not organize labor forces of hundreds of people. They do not have the time, the surplus resources, or the social structure to undertake projects like this. Unless, of course, they were not really hunter-gatherers. Unless they were survivors of a destroyed civilization, rebuilding what they remembered. Because that is what Göbekli Tepe looks like. A memorial. A desperate attempt to preserve knowledge in stone before it was completely lost. And then there is Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Walls made of stones weighing over 200 tons each, fitted together so precisely that you cannot slide a credit card between them. No mortar, no cement, just stone on stone, locked in place by geometry alone. These walls have survived earthquakes that destroyed modern buildings in Cusco. They have stood for centuries, possibly millennia, without shifting, without settling, without any sign of structural failure, and no one knows how they were built. The Inca, who controlled this region when the Spanish arrived, claimed they did not build Sacsayhuaman. They said it was already there when their civilization began, ancient beyond memory, built by gods or giants, depending on which legend you believe. Modern engineers have tried to replicate this construction technique. They have failed. You cannot simply stack 200-ton blocks with irregular shapes and have them locked together perfectly without advanced planning, precise measurements, and tools we claim did not exist. And yet, there it stands, silent, immovable, impossible. Easter Island presents a different kind of mystery. 900 stone statues called moai, scattered across a remote island in the middle of the Pacific, each one weighing between 10 and 80 tons, carved from volcanic tuff, transported miles from the quarry, and erected on platforms with impossible precision. The official story is that the Rapa Nui people carved these statues using stone tools, then moved them using ropes and logs. Teams of researchers have attempted to replicate this process. They managed to move a few small statues short distances under perfect conditions, with dozens of people pulling in perfect coordination. And even then, they damaged the statues. The largest moai weighs over 80 tons. It was transported over 6 miles, uphill, and placed upright on a platform, with Stone Age technology. Does that sound plausible to you? Or maybe the Rapa Nui were also inheritors. Maybe they found these statues already there. Or maybe they were trying to recreate something their ancestors once knew how to do. And like so many post-cataclysm cultures, they succeeded for a while. And then the knowledge faded. The last moai were left unfinished in the quarry. Abandoned. Forgotten. The same pattern appears in France. Karnak. Over 3,000 standing stones arranged in perfectly straight lines extending for miles. Alignments that track solar and lunar cycles. Stones weighing up to 300 tons, moved and erected with unknown methods. No written records explain who built this. No culture takes credit. The stones were just there when recorded history began. And here is where it gets even stranger. Across Scotland, Turkey, and Peru, there are stone fortifications that have been vitrified. The stones have been melted, fused together by heat exceeding 1100 degrees Celsius. Heat that was sustained long enough to turn solid rock into glass. There are over 60 of these vitrified forts in Scotland alone. The official explanation? Accidental fires. Timber structures burned so hot they melted the stone. But engineers who study combustion will tell you that is impossible. Wood fires do not burn hot enough to vitrify stone. Even with ideal conditions, maximum airflow, and sustained burning, you are not reaching the temperatures necessary. You would need something closer to industrial furnaces, or something else entirely. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question. What kind of warfare produces heat like that? What kind of weapons turn stone fortifications into glass? The ancient Vedic texts describe weapons called brahmastras, weapons that produced blinding light, searing heat, and devastation on a massive scale. Descriptions that sound disturbingly similar to nuclear weapons. And in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, archaeologists have found skeletons with radiation levels 3 times higher than normal. Streets where people appear to have been flash incinerated mid-step. Stones showing signs of extreme heat exposure. This is not myth. This is archaeology. Uncomfortable archaeology that does not fit the narrative, so it gets explained away or ignored. But you cannot ignore the pattern. Precision stonework, astronomical knowledge, global distribution, shared mathematical constants, and evidence of technologies that should not exist. These structures were not built by primitives with copper chisels and unlimited patience. They were built by people who knew what they were doing, people who had tools, knowledge, and capabilities that we are only now beginning to match. And they built them to last, because they knew what was coming. They knew that everything else, the cities, the libraries, the technologies would be destroyed. But stone endures. Stone survives. And if you encode the right information into stone, future generations might figure it out. We are those future generations. And the message carved into these monuments is starting to become clear. We were here before. We built this before. We knew these things before. And it all came crashing down. Learn from our mistakes. Preserve the knowledge. Or you will face the same fate. The stones are still speaking. The question is whether we are ready to hear what they are saying. There are 2 kinds of memory. The kind you write down, and the kind you carry in your cells. The first kind can be destroyed, burned, erased, lost to time. But the second kind? That stays, encoded in DNA, passed down through generations, waiting to be read by anyone who knows how to look. And when you look at human genetics, you see the scars of catastrophe, events so devastating they nearly wiped us out. Bottlenecks where the entire human population collapsed to numbers so small that we should not have survived. But we did survive. and the memory of what happened is written in our genes. 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba erupted in Sumatra, Indonesia. It was not just an eruption, it was a super eruption, the most catastrophic volcanic event to occur during human existence. 800 cubic miles of rock and ash ejected into the atmosphere. 6 years of volcanic winter. Global temperatures dropping by 15 degrees Celsius. Crops failing worldwide. Animals dying in mass extinctions. And humans almost went extinct. Genetic analysis shows that the human population crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. That is it. That is all that was left of humanity. A few thousand survivors scattered across Africa and possibly parts of Asia. Everyone alive today descends from that tiny remnant population. Think about what that means. An entire world of human cultures, languages, knowledge systems gone. The genetic diversity we see in modern humans is absurdly low compared to other species. 2 random chimpanzees from the same forest have more genetic diversity than a human from Norway and a human from New Zealand. We are all incredibly closely related because we all came from the same small group of survivors. And this was not the only bottleneck. Mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosome Adam, the most recent common ancestors of all humans alive today, point to genetic convergence events. Moments when the population collapsed and then expanded again from a small founding group. It has happened multiple times. Each time, knowledge was lost, technology disappeared, and the survivors had to start over with fragments of what came before. But here is the fascinating part. Even when written records disappear, even when technologies are forgotten, the memory of what happened survives. Not in genetics this time, but in something almost as persistent: mythology. Every culture on Earth has a flood story. Every single one. Over 200 distinct cultures, with no contact, no shared history, no common language, and they all tell the same story. There was a great civilization. People became proud, corrupt, technologically advanced. The gods decided to reset everything. A massive flood covered the earth. Only a few righteous people survived, usually in a boat or ark. They brought animals, seeds, knowledge. After the waters receded, they landed on a mountain, and they had to rebuild civilization from scratch. The details are eerily consistent. The biblical Noah, the Sumerian Utnapishtim, the Hindu Manu, the Greek Deucalion, the Aztec Coxcoxtli, the Algonquin Nanabozo. Different names, same story. A global catastrophe. A chosen few who survived. A restart. And here is what makes it undeniable. These stories include specific details that match geological evidence. Plato wrote about Atlantis, a powerful maritime civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, which puts it at around 9,600 BC. He said it was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods. The island continent sank beneath the waves. 9,600 BC. That is the exact date of Meltwater Pulse 1A. The sudden, catastrophic rise in sea levels as the Ice Age ended. Glaciers covering North America and Europe melted in what geologists consider an instant, just a few centuries. Sea levels rose 400 feet. Coastlines that had been inhabited for thousands of years vanished underwater. If there was an advanced coastal civilization 11,000 years ago, and all the underwater structures we have been finding suggest there was, then Meltwater Pulse 1A would have destroyed it completely. Every port city, every coastal settlement, every center of trade and learning, gone, drowned. Exactly as Plato described. The Sumerian king list is another piece of evidence that should not be dismissed so easily. It is an ancient text that lists all the kings who ruled Mesopotamia, going back to before the flood, and the pre-flood kings have reigns listed in tens of thousands of years. Absurd lifespans that modern scholars dismiss as mythology or exaggeration. But what if those are not individual lifespans? What if they are dynasties, or calendar systems we do not understand, or records of a civilization that existed far longer than we acknowledge? And then the text says, the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, kingship was lowered from heaven once more. Kingship lowered from heaven. Knowledge coming from somewhere else. Teachers who brought civilization to the survivors. That pattern appears everywhere. Aboriginal Australians have oral histories describing coastlines that are now 400 feet underwater, specific geographic features that can be verified with bathymetric surveys. These are not vague myths. These are accurate descriptions of landscapes that have been submerged for 12,000 years. And the Aboriginals have maintained these stories through oral tradition for all that time. That is 12,000 years of unbroken memory, passed down generation after generation without writing, without recording technology, just human memory and the absolute commitment to preserving the truth. And what do these stories say? The same thing every other flood myth says. There was a time before. There were people who had knowledge. The waters came. Almost everything was lost. But here is where it gets even more interesting. The mythology does not just talk about the flood. It talks about what came after, and specifically about who helped the survivors rebuild. In almost every post-flood mythology, there are gods or culture bearers who appear and teach humanity the basics of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, architecture, mathematics, writing. These beings are described as coming from the sea, from the sky, from somewhere else, and they are credited with jump-starting human civilization. In Peru, there is Viracocha, a bearded, pale-skinned god who appeared after a great flood and taught the ancestors of the Inca how to farm, build, and organize society. Then he walked into the ocean and disappeared. In Mexico, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, another bearded figure who brought knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and architecture, taught the people, then sailed away on a raft, promising to return. In Egypt, Osiris, a king who came from elsewhere, civilized the Egyptians, taught them agriculture and law, and then was killed and resurrected. The pharaohs claimed descent from him. In Mesopotamia, Oannes, a being described as half-man, half-fish who emerged from the Persian Gulf and taught the Sumerians writing, mathematics, and agriculture. He would return to the sea each night and emerge again each morning to continue teaching. These are not vague myths. These are specific, detailed accounts of knowledge transfer, and they all happen right after the flood, right after the catastrophe, right when you would expect survivors from the destroyed civilization to be teaching primitive post-cataclysm humans how to restart society. This is cargo cult behavior in reverse. We think of cargo cults as primitive people worshipping technology they do not understand. But what if the gods were just technologically advanced survivors who seemed godlike to Stone Age people? If you survived a global catastrophe, if you had fragments of advanced knowledge, if you found scattered groups of humans living in caves and hunting with spears and you taught them agriculture, showed them how to align structures with the stars, gave them the basics of mathematics, they would worship you. They would call you a god. They would preserve your teachings as sacred knowledge. And that is exactly what we see in the archaeological record. Mystery schools, priesthoods, secret societies, all claiming to preserve ancient knowledge handed down from the gods, knowledge of astronomy that should not exist, mathematical constants that primitive cultures should not know, engineering techniques that exceed their supposed technological capabilities. The Egyptian mystery schools required decades of study before initiates could access the deepest knowledge. Pythagoras studied in Egypt for 22 years. Plato studied there. They were not learning new ideas. They were learning old ideas, ideas preserved from before the catastrophe. Hermetic texts speak of as above, so below, the idea that cosmic patterns reflect earthly patterns. This is not philosophy. This is astronomy. The understanding that celestial mechanics and terrestrial cycles are connected. Knowledge that requires generations of careful observation and mathematical analysis. The Freemasons claim unbroken lineage from the builders of Solomon's Temple, and before that, the builders of the pyramids. They preserve geometric and architectural knowledge, encoded in symbols and rituals. Why? Because that knowledge was too important to lose. It had to survive even if civilization fell again. The Rosicrucians preserve alchemical and mathematical secrets they claim come from ancient Egypt, not mythical Egypt, real Egypt. The Egypt that inherited knowledge from what came before. These are not fantasies. These are preservation systems, backup drives for human knowledge, ways to keep critical information alive, even when everything else collapses. And the most disturbing part? The knowledge they preserved includes warnings. Warnings about cycles, about resets, about catastrophes that repeat. The ancients knew something we have forgotten. They knew that this has happened before. They knew it would happen again. And they tried to tell us, in stone, in stars, in stories passed down for 12,000 years. The genetic evidence proves we almost went extinct. The geological evidence proves there was a global catastrophe. The mythological evidence proves that survivors tried to preserve what they knew. We are not the first advanced civilization. We are just the latest attempt, and the clock is ticking. In museums around the world, there are artifacts that should not exist, objects that do not fit the timeline, technologies that appear centuries or millennia before they were supposedly invented. And when you ask curators about these items, you get the same response every time. Origin unknown, purpose uncertain, possibly ceremonial. Ceremonial. That is the word archaeologists use when they cannot explain something. When an artifact is too advanced, too precise, too impossible for its time period, it becomes ceremonial, as if ancient people spent their limited resources creating useless objects for religious purposes. But what if these objects were not ceremonial? What if they were functional? What if they were remnants of technologies we have forgotten and are only now beginning to rediscover? Let us start with something simple. The Baghdad Battery, found in 1936 near Baghdad, Iraq. A clay jar, about 5 inches tall. Inside, a copper cylinder. Inside that, an iron rod. The components are sealed with asphalt, and when you fill the jar with an acidic liquid vinegar, wine, citrus juice, it produces electricity. 1.1 to 2 volts. It is a battery, a 2,000-year-old battery. Engineers have built replicas. They work perfectly. You can power a small light bulb with them. You can use them for electroplating coating objects with a thin layer of metal using electrical current. And there is evidence that ancient cultures did exactly that. Gold-plated objects with layers so thin and uniform that they require electroplating to produce. The official explanation? Ceremonial object, possibly used for religious purposes, despite the fact that it is a functioning electrical device. Why would they dismiss this? Because if ancient Mesopotamians had batteries, that raises uncomfortable questions. What were they powering? What other electrical devices existed? How much technology have we lost? And the Baghdad Battery is not alone. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, there are reliefs carved into stone walls that show objects that look identical to Crookes tubes, early electrical discharge tubes invented in the 1800s. The carvings show these tube-like objects connected to what appear to be cable bundles, held by human figures, with a pillar that looks suspiciously like an insulator. Electrical engineers who have studied these reliefs say the design is functionally correct. If you wanted to create a larger-scale light source using electrical discharge, this is how you would do it. The proportions are right, the components are right, the connections are right. Were the Egyptians lighting their temples with electricity? Is that how they carved intricate hieroglyphs in deep, narrow corridors, with no torch marks on the ceilings, no soot stains, no smoke damage? The conventional answer is that they used mirrors and sunlight, reflected down multiple corridors, around multiple corners, into chambers hundreds of feet from any opening. That is the official explanation. Mirrors. Despite the fact that this would be incredibly inefficient and difficult to maintain. Or maybe they just had lights. Electrical lights, like the carvings clearly show. But if you want undeniable proof of lost technology, there is one artifact that cannot be explained away: the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in 1900 by sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera, a corroded lump of bronze pulled from a shipwreck dating to around 80 BC. For decades, it sat in a museum, barely studied, just another piece of ancient debris, until someone took an X-ray. Inside that corroded lump were gears, dozens of them, interlocking bronze gears of different sizes, precisely machined, arranged in a complex system that tracked astronomical cycles. It took scientists over 100 years to fully decode what this device did, and when they finally figured it out, it shattered every assumption about ancient Greek technology. The Antikythera mechanism is an analog computer. It tracks the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. It predicts eclipses. It accounts for the elliptical orbit of the moon, a calculation that requires understanding Kepler's laws, which were not discovered until the 1600s. It even tracks the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. The gearwork is so precise, the engineering so sophisticated, that nothing comparable appears in the historical record for another 1,400 years. 1,400 years. That is the technology gap we are looking at. And this was not some one-off experimental device. The quality of the craftsmanship suggests this was a refined technology, something that had been developed, improved, and perfected over time, which means there were earlier versions, simpler versions, a whole progression of mechanical computing devices that have been completely lost to history. How many of these devices existed? How many corroded into unrecognizable lumps of metal? How many were melted down for scrap bronze? How much did the ancient Greeks actually know about mechanics, astronomy, and precision engineering? We do not know, because almost all of it is gone. And the only reason we know about the Antikythera mechanism is because one shipwreck happened to be found by divers in the right place at the right time. What else has been lost? Let us talk about metallurgy. In New Delhi, India, there stands an iron pillar. It has been standing for over 1600 years, and it has never rusted, not once, despite being exposed to monsoon rains, humidity, and temperature extremes for over a millennium and a half. Modern metallurgists have analyzed this pillar. The iron is 99.72% pure. That level of purity requires advanced smelting techniques, and even with pure iron, it should still rust in those conditions. Except this pillar does not, because it is coated with a thin layer of mica white, a compound of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen that forms a protective barrier against corrosion. This coating does not form naturally. It had to be engineered. Someone in ancient India knew how to create rust-proof iron, a technique we only rediscovered in the modern era, and we still do not know exactly how they did it. At Sacsayhuaman, those massive stone walls are held together by metal clamps, not iron, not bronze, an alloy we cannot identify. The clamps were poured molten into carved channels in the stone, then allowed to cool and harden. This requires not just metallurgy but precision, metalworking, and an understanding of thermal expansion. And no one knows what the alloy is. Modern analysis has been inconclusive. Whatever formula they used, it is lost. Then there is aluminum, a metal that requires 660 degrees Celsius and electrolysis to produce. It was not isolated as a pure element until 1825, and yet aluminum objects have been found in ancient jewelry and artifacts. Small amounts, yes, but it is there, in contexts where it should not exist. How did they produce it? We do not know. The knowledge is gone. And then there are the objects that should not exist at all. The London hammer, a metal hammer with a wooden handle, embedded in Cretaceous limestone rock that is over 100 million years old. The hammer is clearly of modern design. Metal head, wooden handle, partially fossilized. But it is in rock that predates human existence by millions of years. The skeptics say it is a hoax, a modern hammer that got encased in rapidly forming mineral deposits. Except the mineralization of the wood shows long-term fossilization, and the rock formation is genuine Cretaceous limestone. It does not add up, unless the timeline is wrong, unless objects like this are evidence that advanced civilizations have existed far deeper in Earth's history than we are willing to accept. But let us move to something even stranger: acoustic levitation. The idea that sound-specific frequencies and harmonics can manipulate physical objects, can lift them, move them, even reshape them. We know this is possible. Modern science has demonstrated acoustic levitation in laboratories. Using ultrasonic frequencies, researchers can suspend small objects in mid-air, move them without touching them, and manipulate their position with precision. Now go back to the ancient world. Coral Castle in Florida, built by Edward Leedskalnin in the early 1900s. This man, working alone, moved and carved over 1,100 tons of coral blocks, some weighing 30 tons each. He worked at night, in secret, and refused to explain his methods. When asked, he said he understood the secrets of the pyramids. He talked about magnetism, frequencies, and energy. After his death, researchers found bizarre equipment, flywheels, magnets, and devices that seemed designed to generate or manipulate electromagnetic fields. But no one has been able to replicate what he did. The blocks are still there, perfectly balanced, impossibly moved by one man with no modern equipment. Tibetan monks have been documented using sound to levitate stones. Deep horns, drums, and chanting in specific frequencies that cause rocks to rise and move. Western witnesses in the 1930s reported seeing this. Engineers analyzed the accounts and concluded that if the frequencies were precisely tuned, it is theoretically possible. And then there are the pyramids themselves. Recent studies show that the chambers inside the Great Pyramid were designed as acoustic resonators. Specific frequencies produce standing waves. The granite boxes in the king's chamber ring like bells when struck, producing frequencies that match human brainwave patterns. Were the pyramids devices? Not tombs, but machines? Machines designed to manipulate energy, frequency, and resonance? The ancient texts talk about sound being used to move massive stones, the walls of Jericho falling to trumpet blasts, stones being lifted by chanting and vibration. We dismiss these as myths, but what if they were instructions, technical manuals describing lost technology? Cymatics, the study of sound's effect on matter, shows that specific frequencies create geometric patterns in sand, water, and other materials. And those patterns look exactly like the geometric designs carved into ancient temples, flowers of life, sacred geometry, mandalas. These are not random decorations. They are visual representations of sound frequencies. What if the ancients understood something we are only beginning to rediscover? That sound, frequency, and resonance are not just abstract concepts, but tools. Tools that can move objects, transmit energy, and alter matter itself. The suppressed technologies are not suppressed because they are fake. They are suppressed because they work. And if they work, that means the ancients were not primitive. It means they had knowledge we have lost. Knowledge that threatens the entire narrative of linear progress. We are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are in the recovery phase. Slowly, painfully, rediscovering what civilization number 4 knew instinctively. And some people do not want us to remember. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map. It showed the Atlantic Ocean, the coast of South America, and something that should have been impossible, the northern coastline of Antarctica, in detail, with mountains and rivers clearly marked. Here is the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. That is 307 years after Piri Reis drew his map. And the coast he depicted? It has been covered by ice for at least 6,000 years, probably longer. So how did a 16th century Turkish admiral draw an accurate map of a coastline that was buried under a mile of ice? The answer is in the notes he left on the map itself. Piri Reis wrote that he did not discover these places. He compiled his map from over 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, some even older, maps that had been preserved in the Library of Constantinople and other archives. Maps that showed the world as it existed long before recorded history. In the 1960s, the United States Air Force asked Professor Charles Hapgood to analyze the Piri Reis map using modern cartographic techniques. What they found was shocking. The map was not just roughly accurate, it was precisely accurate. The longitude measurements were correct. The coastal features matched seismic surveys of the rock beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Surveys that were not conducted until 1949. Piri Reis, using ancient source maps, had drawn Antarctica as it appeared before the ice, and the accuracy was beyond anything that should have been possible without aerial surveying or satellite imagery. This was not an isolated case. In 1531, a French cartographer named Orontius Phineus created another map. This one showed the entire Antarctic continent, not just a coastline, but the whole landmass, with rivers, mountain ranges, internal geography that was, again, remarkably accurate when compared to modern ice-penetrating radar surveys. Orontius Phineus also claimed he was copying from ancient sources, maps that had survived from antiquity, maps created by someone who had actually explored and charted Antarctica when it was ice-free. Then there is the Mercator map of 1569. Gerardus Mercator, one of history's most famous cartographers, created a map of the Arctic that shows geographic details not confirmed until the 20th century. Coastlines, islands, features that were supposedly unknown for another 300 years. Where did he get this information? He said it came from ancient sources. The same answer every time. And in 1737, Philippe Buache created a map that showed Antarctica divided into two major landmasses by a waterway. At the time, this was pure speculation. Antarctica had barely been explored. It was assumed to be a single continent. But in 1958, ice-penetrating radar revealed the truth. Remove the ice, and Antarctica is indeed two landmasses connected by a land bridge, exactly as Buache's map showed. How did he know? Again, ancient sources. There is a pattern here, and it is not coincidence. These cartographers were not making lucky guesses. They were copying from maps that originated in a time when these coastlines were accessible, when Antarctica was not frozen, when someone had the maritime capability and navigational technology to explore and accurately chart the world. That someone was not the Greeks, not the Romans, not any civilization we officially acknowledge, because all of those civilizations came after Antarctica was already frozen. So who made the original maps? Civilization number 4. The pre-flood maritime culture that existed when sea levels were 400 feet lower and Antarctica was partially ice-free. A civilization that had advanced navigation, trigonometry, and possibly even aerial surveying capabilities. Think about what it takes to create an accurate map. You need to know your latitude and longitude, Latitude is relatively easy, you can calculate it using the sun and stars. But longitude, that requires precise timekeeping. Chronometers, clocks accurate enough to measure your position relative to a fixed meridian. Europeans did not solve the longitude problem until the 1700s. And yet, the ancient source maps that Piri Reis and others copied from showed accurate longitude. Whoever made these maps had solved a problem that supposedly took humanity until the Age of Enlightenment to figure out. Or maybe they had something better. Maybe they had aerial surveying, the ability to view the Earth from above, because that is what these maps look like. They show a perspective that is only achievable from high altitude or from space. Modern cartographers use satellites, planes, drones. We can see the curvature of the Earth, the true shapes of continents, the relationship between landmasses. And that is exactly what these ancient source maps show, a perspective that should not have been possible without flight. But there is something else, something even more disturbing. These maps do not just show Antarctica, they show a world in transition, a world where the Ice Age is ending, where coastlines are changing rapidly, where massive floods are reshaping geography. And whoever made these maps knew it was happening. They were documenting a cataclysm in real time. The implications are staggering. There was a global maritime civilization that existed before the flood. They explored the entire planet. They charted coastlines that are now underwater or buried in ice. They had navigational technology, surveying equipment, and mathematical knowledge that we did not rediscover until the modern era. And they knew the world was ending. So they preserved their knowledge. They created maps, detailed, accurate maps that could survive the catastrophe and guide future civilizations. Some of those maps made it through, copied and recopied through the ages, preserved in libraries, passed down through secret societies and priesthoods, until finally, in the 15 and 1600s, European cartographers stumbled across them and realized they were looking at impossible knowledge. But instead of asking how ancient people could have created these maps, the establishment dismissed them, called them forgeries, speculative fiction, lucky guesses, because to acknowledge the truth would mean acknowledging that an advanced civilization existed before ours, a civilization that explored the world more thoroughly than we did until the age of satellites, a civilization that had technology we are only now beginning to match. The maps are evidence, physical, undeniable evidence, not myths, not legends, actual cartographic documents that show knowledge that should not exist, and they prove something crucial. The survivors of civilization number 4 were not just primitive refugees struggling to stay alive. They were organized. They preserved their knowledge. They maintained records. They created backup copies of critical information because they knew the world was about to change catastrophically. And they were right. The flood came. The ice melted. Sea levels rose 400 feet. The coastlines they had mapped disappeared beneath the waves, and the civilization that had charted them was destroyed. But the maps survived, hidden in libraries, guarded by mystery schools, copied by monks and scholars who did not fully understand what they were preserving. Until finally, European explorers in the Age of Discovery started finding the places these ancient maps depicted, and they realized something terrifying. These maps were more accurate than anything they could produce. Maps that were thousands of years old were better than maps created with the best technology of the 16 and 1700s. That should have been a revelation. That should have changed history. But instead, it was buried, dismissed, explained away, because the alternative was too dangerous. If the maps were real, then everything we believed about human history was wrong, and the people in power, the institutions, the churches, the governments could not allow that. So the cartographic anomalies were relegated to footnotes, curiosities, mysteries without answers, and the world moved on, pretending that the evidence did not exist. But it does exist. The maps are real, the accuracy is undeniable, and the implications are unavoidable. We are not the first civilization to explore the Earth. We are not the first to create accurate maps. We are not the first to achieve advanced navigation and surveying. We are just the first in this cycle, the latest attempt to rebuild what was lost. And the maps they left behind are proof that they tried to help us. They tried to give us the knowledge we would need to avoid making the same mistakes. The question is whether we are paying attention. When a civilization falls, the first thing that dies is not the people, it is the knowledge. Libraries burn, records are lost, technologies are forgotten, but there is one thing that survives longer than anything else. Stories. Stories do not need paper. They do not need stone tablets. They just need someone to tell them and someone to listen. And if the story is important enough, If it carries information critical to survival, it gets passed down, generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. What we call mythology is not fantasy, it is memory. Cultural memory of events so catastrophic, so world-changing, that they burned themselves into the collective consciousness of humanity. And if you know how to read these stories, you can extract real history from what we have been taught to dismiss as primitive superstition. Let us start with the organizations that explicitly claim to preserve ancient knowledge. The mystery schools, secret societies, esoteric orders that have existed for thousands of years, all claiming the same thing. We are the guardians of wisdom from before the fall. The Egyptian mystery schools were not just religious institutions, they were universities, centers of learning where mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering were taught to carefully selected initiates. But the deepest knowledge was restricted. You did not just walk in and learn the secrets of the pyramids. You spent decades proving yourself worthy. Pythagoras studied in Egypt for 22 years before being initiated into the inner mysteries. 22 years. And when he emerged, he brought back mathematical and geometric knowledge that formed the foundation of Western philosophy and science. He did not invent these concepts. He learned them from Egyptian priests who had preserved them from an earlier age. Plato spent 13 years studying in Egypt. He wrote about Atlantis not as fiction but as history passed down by Egyptian priests who kept records going back thousands of years, records of civilizations that existed before the flood. And what did these mystery schools teach? That knowledge is cyclical, that civilizations rise and fall, that the cosmos operates in great cycles, and humanity is subject to those cycles, that the truly important knowledge must be hidden, encoded, and preserved for those wise enough to seek it. This is not mysticism. This is a preservation strategy. If you know that catastrophe is cyclical, that civilization will fall again, you do not write everything down in one place. You do not make knowledge freely available where it can be destroyed in a single event. You create redundancy. You encode information in symbols, rituals, architecture. You create organizations dedicated to passing it down through initiation and oral tradition. The Hermetic tradition does exactly this. As above, so below. This is not just a mystical phrase, it is astronomy. It is the understanding that celestial patterns and terrestrial events are connected, that the movements of the stars and planets influence conditions on Earth, that if you understand the cycles above, you can predict the cycles below. This knowledge requires generations of careful observation, star charts, mathematical calculations, record-keeping spanning centuries, the kind of systematic study that only an advanced civilization could maintain. And the Hermetic texts claim this knowledge comes from Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom. From before the flood, Freemasonry claims unbroken lineage from the builders of Solomon's temple, and before that, from the builders of the Egyptian pyramids. They preserve geometric knowledge, architectural principles, and construction techniques in symbolic form. The square and compass, the working tools, the degrees of initiation that correspond to levels of knowledge. Why? Because building knowledge was too valuable to lose. Even if civilization collapsed, even if all the master builders died, the principles had to survive. So they were encoded in ritual, preserved in symbol, passed down through lodges that operated independently, so that no single catastrophe could destroy them all. The Rosicrucians take it even further. They claim their knowledge comes from a secret vault discovered beneath the temple, a vault containing wisdom from before the flood, alchemical formulas, mathematical secrets, scientific knowledge encoded in symbolic form to prevent it from being lost or misused. Alchemy is not about turning lead into gold. It is chemistry, metallurgy, material science encoded in symbolic language to protect it from destruction and ensure only serious students could decode it. The same way nuclear physics was classified during the Cold War, ancient knowledge was classified by encoding it in symbols that seemed like mystical nonsense to outsiders. These organizations are all doing the same thing, preserving knowledge from civilization number 4, keeping it alive through the dark ages after the catastrophe, waiting for humanity to advance enough to understand it again. And the most explicit preservation of ancient knowledge comes from the culture that never forgot, India. The Vedic texts are extraordinary, not because they are religious, but because they are technical. The Mahabharata and Ramayana describe flying machines called vimanas, with specifications that read like engineering manuals, propulsion systems using mercury vortex engines, navigation equipment, weapons systems, detailed descriptions of aerial combat, Modern aerospace engineers have analyzed these descriptions, and they work. The principles are sound. The physics check out. These are not fantasy descriptions, these are technical documents. The texts describe weapons called Brahmastras and other divine weapons that produce effects identical to nuclear detonations. Blinding light, searing heat, shock waves that destroy entire armies, lingering poison that kills anyone who enters the area, hair and nails falling out, descriptions that match radiation poisoning, mythology, or eyewitness accounts of ancient technological warfare. And then there is Mohenjo-Daro, an ancient city in Pakistan. When archaeologists excavated it, they found something disturbing. Skeletons lying in the streets, not buried, not in graves, just lying where they fell. And those skeletons are radioactive. Radiation levels 3 to 4 times higher than normal background radiation. The city also shows signs of extreme heat exposure, vitrified stone, melted pottery, evidence of temperatures far beyond what conventional fires could produce. And the pattern of destruction suggests a sudden, catastrophic event that killed people instantly as they went about their daily lives. What kind of natural disaster does that? Volcanoes give warning. Earthquakes do not leave radiation. Floods do not vitrify stone. But nuclear weapons do. And the Vedic texts describe exactly this kind of destruction being unleashed in ancient wars. We dismiss it as myth because the alternative is too disturbing. The alternative is that human civilization achieved nuclear capability before and used it and destroyed itself. But the Vedas are not the only texts that preserve impossible knowledge. The Dogon tribe of West Africa has astronomical information that should not exist. They have known for centuries that Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, has a companion star, Sirius B, a white dwarf so dim it is invisible to the naked eye. It was not discovered by Western astronomy until 1862, and it was not photographed until 1970. But the Dogon knew about it. They knew it orbited Sirius A every 50 years. They knew it was incredibly dense, despite being small. They drew diagrams showing its elliptical orbit. All of this before Western astronomers confirmed any of it. How? The Dogon say they were taught by the Nommo, beings who came from the Sirius system in the distant past. Amphibious beings who emerged from the sea and taught the ancestors of the Dogon about astronomy, agriculture, and civilization. The same story again. Teachers from the sea, culture bearers, gods who brought knowledge after a catastrophe. And it is not just the Dogon. Aboriginal Australians have star maps and astronomical knowledge that rivals modern astronomy. They can navigate by stars with precision that European sailors did not match until the invention of the sextant. They have oral traditions describing celestial events that can be verified by astronomical calculations, events that happened thousands of years ago. Polynesian navigators crossed the Pacific Ocean using only stars, wave patterns, and bird behavior. They found tiny islands separated by thousands of miles of open water, without compasses, without maps, just knowledge passed down through oral tradition, knowledge that allowed them to navigate with accuracy that modern GPS users would struggle to match. These are not primitive people making lucky guesses. These are cultures preserving advanced knowledge through oral tradition, knowledge that came from somewhere, from someone who understood astronomy, navigation, and mathematics at a level we assume is modern. The pattern is undeniable. Mystery schools preserving geometric and architectural knowledge, Vedic texts describing advanced technology and warfare, tribal cultures maintaining astronomical knowledge they should not possess, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. There was a source, an original culture that had this knowledge, and when that culture was destroyed, survivors spread across the world and taught what they could to whoever would listen. Those teachings were preserved by priesthoods, by initiates, by oral tradition, encoded in symbols and stories so they could not be destroyed. We are not rediscovering this knowledge. We are remembering it, decoding the stories, unlocking the symbols, recognizing that what we dismissed as mythology is actually history. And the message encoded in these traditions is clear. This has happened before. Civilization rises, civilization falls, knowledge is lost. Survivors preserve what they can, and the cycle begins again. We are in that cycle right now, and the ancient wisdom traditions are trying to warn us, the same way they were warned by those who came before. The question is whether we are listening. The story of human civilization, as taught in every school and university, follows a simple progression. Hunter-gatherers, for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, around 10,000 BC, the invention of agriculture. slow development of farming communities. The first cities appearing around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, writing, mathematics, and organized religion emerging shortly after, and from there, steady progress through the Bronze Age, Iron Age, Classical period, and into modernity. It is a clean narrative, linear, logical, and almost completely contradicted by the archaeological evidence. The timeline does not work, the progression does not make sense, and the more we dig, the more we find evidence that civilization did not develop. Gradually, it appeared suddenly, often fully formed, as if someone hit the start button on cultures that should have taken centuries to develop. Let us begin with Göbekli Tepe. We have talked about this site before, but its implications for the timeline cannot be overstated. 11,600 years old, that is 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 years before the pyramids, and 8,000 years before the supposed invention of civilization in Mesopotamia. According to the standard model, the people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers, nomadic tribes with no permanent settlements, no agriculture, no social hierarchy capable of organizing larger-scale construction projects. And yet, there it stands. Massive shaped pillars weighing 20 tons, intricate carvings, astronomical alignments, evidence of planning, engineering, and coordinated labor involving hundreds of people over multiple generations. But here is the problem. Göbekli Tepe is not crude. It is not a primitive first attempt at monumental architecture. It is sophisticated. The craftsmanship is excellent. The organization is complex. This is not the work of people experimenting with new ideas. This is the work of people who already knew what they were doing. And then it gets stranger. The deeper you dig at Göbekli Tepe, the better the construction becomes. The oldest layers show superior stonework, more intricate carvings, better engineering. The later layers show decline, degradation, as if the builders were trying to copy something they no longer fully understood. This is backwards. Technology is supposed to improve over time, not degrade, unless the people building the later phases were not the original builders, unless they were survivors trying to recreate what had been lost. The same pattern appears in Egypt. The Great Pyramid, built supposedly around 2500 BC, represents the absolute peak of Egyptian engineering. The precision is unmatched. The scale is extraordinary. The knowledge encoded in its dimensions is sophisticated beyond anything that came before or after. And then Egyptian pyramid construction declines. Later, pyramids are smaller, cruder, less precise. The pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties are barely standing. They used inferior materials, sloppy construction techniques, and none of the mathematical sophistication of Giza. If the Egyptians were developing pyramid technology, you would expect the opposite. Early attempts would be crude, later attempts would improve, but that is not what we see. We see a peak at the beginning, followed by steady decline. As if the 4th dynasty was not inventing pyramid construction, they were copying it, and each generation the knowledge faded a little more. The same is true of writing. Sumerian cuneiform appears in the archaeological record fully formed. There is no gradual development from simple pictographs to complex written language. One moment, there is nothing. The next moment, there is a complete writing system capable of recording complex legal codes, astronomical observations, and literary texts. How? Languages evolve. Writing systems develop over centuries of trial and error. But Sumerian writing appears like someone turned on a switch, and the Sumerians themselves claimed they were taught writing by the gods, by beings who came from the sea and brought civilization. Egyptian hieroglyphics show the same pattern, fully developed from the very beginning. No primitive early forms, no experimentation, just a complete, sophisticated writing system appearing in the historical record with no obvious precursor. Mathematics is even more problematic. The Sumerians had advanced astronomy, algebra, and geometry from the moment they appear in history. They knew about the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes 26,000 years to observe. They had star catalogues. They calculated planetary orbits. They used base 60 mathematics, which is actually superior to base 10 for certain astronomical and geometric calculations. Where did this knowledge come from? They should not have had telescopes. They should not have had centuries of careful observation necessary to detect precession. And yet, they knew. From the very beginning, they knew. The answer, according to their own records, is that they were taught by the Apkallu, the 7 sages who emerged from the sea before the flood and taught humanity the foundations of civilization. That is what the Sumerian texts say, not mythology, historical record. These are the people who taught us. and we dismiss it as legend, because the alternative that there were advanced teachers from a pre-flood civilization breaks the timeline completely. But the most damning evidence comes from artifacts that should not exist, objects that appear in geological strata millions of years before humans supposedly evolved. The Koso artifact, a spark plug encased in a geode. The geode is approximately 500,000 years old based on fossil content. The object inside is clearly a manufactured electrical component, ceramic insulator, metal core, completely artificial. And it is in rock that predates modern humans by hundreds of thousands of years. The official response? Hoax. The geode must have formed rapidly around a modern object. Except geologists who have examined it say the mineralization is consistent with long-term formation, and the object inside shows corrosion and mineral intrusion consistent with extreme age. The Dorchester pot, a metallic, bell-shaped vessel with intricate floral designs, found in solid rock blasted from a quarry in Massachusetts. The rock is dated to 600 million years old, Precambrian, before complex life even existed on land. And yet, there is a manufactured metallic object inside it, dismissed as contamination, as misidentification, as anything except what it obviously is, an artificial object in impossibly old stone. The Iud wedge, an aluminum alloy wedge found in Romania in 1973, 2 meters deep in a layer dated to 250,000 years old. Aluminum is not found in nature in pure form. It requires sophisticated smelting and electrolysis to produce, a process invented in the 1800s. And yet, here is an aluminum object, 250,000 years old, explained away as modern contamination, despite being found deep in undisturbed strata alongside mastodon bones, despite the oxidation layer consistent with extreme age. The pattern repeats: a fossilized hammer found in Cretaceous rock, a metallic sphere with grooves extracted from Precambrian mineral deposits in South Africa, a shoe print fossilized in 500 million year old shale, human artifacts appearing in geological layers where they absolutely should not exist, and every single one is dismissed. Hoax, misidentification, contamination, natural formation, anything except evidence that the timeline is wrong. Because if these artifacts are real, if they are genuinely as old as the rock they are found in, then everything we think we know about human history collapses. It means advanced humans or human-like beings have existed far deeper in Earth's history than we acknowledge. It means this cycle has repeated not just a few times, but many times, over millions of years. Civilizations rising, falling, being buried so deeply that almost all evidence is erased. And it means we are not special. We are not the first intelligent species to evolve on this planet. We are just the latest in a very long line. There is another explanation for the timeline contradictions, one that is actually more disturbing: rapid devolution. When a civilization collapses, knowledge is lost faster than you can imagine. Within 1 generation, you lose literacy. Within 2 generations, you lose advanced technical knowledge. Within 3 generations, the grandchildren are living in the ruins of buildings they cannot reproduce, using technologies they no longer understand, worshipping the artifacts of their ancestors as holy relics. We have seen this happen historically. After the fall of Rome, Europe lost concrete technology, lost aqueduct engineering, lost road-building techniques, lost central heating, plumbing, and medical knowledge. It took 1,000 years to recover what was common knowledge in the Roman Empire. The medieval period proves that civilizational collapse causes knowledge to regress catastrophically, and that was a relatively minor collapse. No global catastrophe, no extinction-level event, just political fragmentation and economic disruption. And still, humanity plunged into a dark age that lasted centuries. Now imagine a real catastrophe. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, sudden climate shifts. Not just cities falling, but entire continents being depopulated. What survives that? Not libraries, not universities, not engineering manuals. What survives are people. And those people know how to hunt, gather, build fires, and find shelter. Everything else is gone. That is how you get Göbekli Tepe, survivors who remember fragments of advanced knowledge trying desperately to preserve it in stone before it is completely forgotten. That is how you get sudden appearances of fully formed civilizations. They are not developing from scratch, they are rebuilding from ruins. The timeline does not show steady progress. It shows recovery, collapse, recovery, collapse. Each time, we climb back up. Each time, we rediscover what was lost. And each time, we tell ourselves we are the first, that we are special, that this time will be different. But the evidence in the rocks, in the artifacts, in the impossible structures scattered across the planet says otherwise. We are not the first. We are just the latest attempt. And the cycle is about to turn again. There is a question that needs to be asked. If the evidence for previous advanced civilizations is this overwhelming geological, architectural, genetic, mythological, why is it not taught in schools? Why do mainstream archaeologists and historians dismiss it? Why does the establishment cling so desperately to a timeline that clearly does not fit the facts? The answer is not what you might think. This is not about a shadowy conspiracy of men in dark rooms hiding the truth. It is about something more insidious: institutional inertia, career protection, and the unwillingness to admit that everything you built your reputation on might be wrong. But there are also cases where evidence has been actively suppressed, deliberately hidden, destroyed. Let us start with the Smithsonian Institution. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America published accounts of giant skeletons being discovered. 7-foot, 8-foot, even 12-foot. Human skeletons with double rows of teeth, elongated skulls, and massive bone structure. Hundreds of documented reports from Ohio, from Wisconsin, from Pennsylvania and New York, and in almost every case, these skeletons were sent to the Smithsonian for study and preservation. The Smithsonian collected them, catalogued them, and then they vanished. For over a century, researchers have asked the Smithsonian to produce these specimens. The response has always been the same. No records exist. Lost in storage, misfiled, or discarded. Hundreds of giant skeletons, all conveniently lost. Every single one. In 2014, a lawsuit was filed, accusing the Smithsonian of deliberately destroying evidence of giant human remains to protect the theory of human evolution. During the proceedings, documents allegedly surfaced showing that the Smithsonian had, in fact, destroyed skeletal remains that did not fit the accepted narrative of human development. The case was settled quietly, the details were sealed, and the official position remains: no giant skeletons ever existed. All the newspaper reports were hoaxes or exaggerations. The evidence was never real. Except the evidence was real. The reports were too numerous, too detailed, too geographically widespread to all be fabrications. And the pattern of evidence being sent to the Smithsonian and then disappearing is too consistent to be coincidence. Why suppress this? Because giant humans do not fit the evolutionary timeline. They complicate the narrative of gradual human development. They suggest genetic diversity or hybridization that mainstream science is not ready to acknowledge. And if these remains were from tens of thousands of years ago, they imply advanced human or human-like populations existing far earlier than we are willing to accept, so the evidence disappears. And anyone who asks too many questions gets labeled a conspiracy theorist. The academic suppression is subtler but just as effective. Researchers who challenge the accepted timeline face professional destruction, not by being censored, but by being marginalized, ridiculed, denied funding, excluded from peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, dated the water erosion on the Sphinx to between 7,000 and 9,000 BC. His analysis is based on solid geology, rainfall patterns, erosion rates, stratigraphy. The science is sound, and it means the Sphinx is at least 9,000 years old, possibly older. The Egyptology establishment attacked him viciously, not because his science was wrong, but because his conclusion was unacceptable. If the Sphinx predates Egyptian civilization by thousands of years, then everything we think we know about ancient Egypt is wrong. So instead of addressing his evidence, they attacked his credentials, his methodology, his motives. Graham Hancock has spent decades researching lost civilizations. His books are bestsellers. His documentaries reach millions of people, and the academic community treats him like a pariah. He has been banned from giving TED Talks. His work is dismissed as pseudoscience. Not because his research is sloppy, he cites hundreds of academic sources, but because his conclusions threaten the established narrative. The pattern is clear. Question the timeline, and you lose credibility. Present evidence that contradicts mainstream archaeology, and you are labeled a fringe theorist. It does not matter how solid your data is. It does not matter how many peer-reviewed sources you cite. If your conclusion is that advanced civilizations existed before the accepted timeline, you are excluded from serious academic discourse. Why? Because careers are built on the current model. Professors have spent decades teaching a specific timeline. Textbooks have been written. Museums have been organized. Grant money has been allocated. Entire departments exist to study civilizations within a specific chronological framework. If that framework is wrong, all of that becomes obsolete. Reputations are destroyed, funding evaporates, and no one wants to be the person who admits they spent 30 years teaching a lie. So the gatekeeping continues. Peer review systems reject papers that challenge fundamental assumptions. Academic conferences refuse to host speakers who present alternative theories. And young researchers learn quickly that questioning the timeline is career suicide. But there are also political and religious stakes. The current historical narrative supports specific power structures. Western civilization traces its roots to Greece and Rome. Judeo-Christian religions are built on a timeline that requires human history to begin relatively recently. Evolutionary theory depends on gradual development over specific timeframes. If you acknowledge that advanced civilizations existed tens of thousands of years ago, all of these narratives fracture. Biblical chronology is wrong. Western civilization is not the inheritor of the first great cultures, it is just the latest in a cycle. And human evolution is far more complex than a simple linear progression from apes to modern humans. That is a lot of ideological weight, a lot of institutions with a vested interest in maintaining the current story. So when evidence emerges that contradicts that story, it is not examined objectively, it is suppressed, dismissed, buried. Sometimes literally. When Indonesian researchers began excavating Gunung Padang and radiocarbon dating returned ages of 25,000 years, the Indonesian government halted the project. Access was restricted, further excavation was prohibited. The site was redesignated as too culturally sensitive for aggressive investigation. Translation: we found something that breaks the timeline, and we are shutting it down before it becomes a problem. Antarctica presents an even more extreme case. As ice melts due to climate change, structures are being revealed beneath the ice sheet. Satellite imagery shows geometric formations, linear features, and anomalies that do not look natural. And access to these areas is completely controlled by military and government agencies. You cannot just fly to Antarctica and explore. You need permits, approvals, government oversight. And if you are a civilian researcher looking for evidence of ancient civilizations, those permits are not granted. The official reason is environmental protection. The real reason? Control of information. If there are ruins under the Antarctic ice ruins from a time when Antarctica was habitable, they would rewrite human history. They would prove that advanced civilizations existed during the last ice age, and that is information governments are not ready to release. The same is true of underwater sites. Off the coast of India, off Japan, in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys show massive structures under hundreds of feet of water, grid patterns, foundations, architecture, and the response from governments and academic institutions is the same. Ignore it. Restrict access. Refuse funding for proper exploration. Because once you send divers down, once you start excavating, once you bring up artifacts and date them, the truth becomes undeniable. And no one in a position of power wants that truth to emerge. This is not about hiding aliens or mystical technologies. This is about protecting the status quo. The current historical narrative supports religious institutions, academic hierarchies, and national identities. Challenging that narrative threatens those institutions. And institutions protect themselves, so evidence is dismissed. Researchers are marginalized. Sites are restricted. And the public is fed the same story we have been told for the last 150 years. Civilization began in Mesopotamia. Before that, humans were primitive. The end. But the evidence keeps emerging. And more people are starting to ask the questions that mainstream academia refuses to answer. And eventually, the weight of that evidence will become too great to suppress. The truth is coming, whether the establishment likes it or not. If you look at individual pieces of evidence in isolation, you can dismiss each one. The Piri Rice map? Lucky guess? Göbekli Tepe? Hunter-gatherers got ambitious. The Great Pyramids mathematics? Coincidence. Giant skeletons? Misidentified or exaggerated. But when you step back and look at everything together, a pattern emerges. A global pattern that cannot be explained by independent invention or coincidence. A pattern that points unmistakably to a single source. A shared origin for knowledge that appears simultaneously across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Let us start with measurements. The ancient world used standardized units of measurement that appear across vast geographic distances. The Egyptian royal cubit, the megalithic yard used in British stone circles, and measurement units found in the Indus Valley civilization, all based on the same mathematical ratios. all derived from Earth's dimensions. This is not approximation. These are precise, standardized measurements showing up in cultures separated by thousands of miles and supposedly thousands of years. You do not get that from independent invention. You get that from shared knowledge, a common source that understood Earth's dimensions and created measurement systems based on them. Then there is symbolism. The spiral appears everywhere, carved into megalithic stones in Ireland, etched into Pueblo cliff dwellings, painted in Aboriginal rock art, found in ancient Mesopotamian seals. The same symbol, the same form, showing up on every continent. The serpent, dragon, feathered serpent, plumed serpent. Snake gods appear in every ancient culture, not as random mythology but as central, powerful symbols associated with wisdom, creation, and cosmic knowledge. Why? Why do cultures with no contact all revere the serpent, the eye, the all-seeing eye of Horus, eye of providence, third eye, evil eye? Every ancient culture has it, and it always represents the same thing: hidden knowledge, spiritual sight, divine awareness. The cross, not the Christian cross that came later, the equal-armed cross, the ankh, the Celtic cross, the swastika, before it was corrupted. These symbols appear in ancient cultures worldwide, always associated with the sun, the four directions, cosmic balance. These are not random similarities. These are signature symbols of a global culture, a visual language shared by people who understood something fundamental about reality, consciousness, and the cosmos. And then there are the calendars. The Maya, the Egyptians, and the ancient Hindus all used calendar systems based on the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete. You cannot observe this in a single lifetime. You cannot even observe it in 100 lifetimes. It requires continuous astronomical observation over thousands of years. And yet, multiple ancient cultures knew about it. They built it into their architecture. They encoded it into their myths. They created calendars that tracked this cosmic cycle with precision. How? Unless there was an earlier civilization that had been observing the stars for thousands of years and passed that knowledge down to the cultures that came after. The evidence for transoceanic contact is undeniable now. Cocaine and tobacco plants, native only to the Americas, have been found in Egyptian mummies. Chemical analysis confirmed it. These are New World plants in Old World contexts. Centuries before Columbus supposedly discovered the Americas, Roman artifacts have been found in underwater sites off the coast of Brazil. African pottery has been discovered in pre-Columbian layers in South America. The Polynesian sweet potato appears in the archaeological record on both sides of the Pacific Ocean at the same time. The ocean was not a barrier, it was a highway, and someone was using it long before the age of exploration. But perhaps the most compelling pattern is architectural. The precision polygonal masonry technique shows up everywhere. Sacsayhuaman in Peru, stone walls in Greece, foundations in Egypt, megalithic sites in Lebanon. Identical construction method. Massive stones with irregular shapes fitted together with no mortar, locked in place by geometry alone. This is not a simple technique that anyone could figure out. This is advanced engineering requiring precise measurement, planning, and execution, and it appears on multiple continents in the same form. There was a global network, a maritime civilization that spanned the planet during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower and now submerged land masses were above water. They had standardized measurements, shared symbolism, advanced astronomy, and sophisticated engineering. And they left messages, deliberate time capsules encoded in stone. The Great Pyramid encodes Earth's dimensions, the speed of light, and astronomical constants. Göbekli Tepe contains carvings that appear to depict a comet impact, possibly the very impact that destroyed their civilization. Stone circles track solar and lunar cycles with precision that allows them to function as calendars and eclipse predictors. These monuments were not tombs. They were not temples in the religious sense. They were archives, information storage systems designed to survive catastrophe, because the builders knew what was coming. They had seen the cycles before. They understood that everything would be destroyed. So they encoded the most important knowledge into the most indestructible medium they could find, stone. And they placed these monuments at key locations around the globe, high places, geologically stable areas, sites that would survive flooding, earthquakes, and climate shifts. They created a distributed network of knowledge preservation. We are supposed to find these sites. We are supposed to decode them. They are messages sent forward in time from civilization number 4 to whoever comes after. Instructions. Warnings. A roadmap for avoiding the same fate. The pattern is not random, it is intentional. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Everywhere you look, the evidence of a previous global civilization is staring you in the face. The measurements, the symbols, the astronomical knowledge, the construction techniques, the shared myths, the time capsules built in stone. They were here, they were advanced, they were global, and they tried desperately to make sure we would remember. The question now is what we do with that knowledge. So here we are, living in what we believe is the pinnacle of human achievement. Smartphones, space stations, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. We look at ancient people and call them primitive. We congratulate ourselves on how far we have come. But what if we have not come as far as we think? What if everything we are discovering now, our technology, our science, our understanding of the cosmos, what if all of this has been done before? That is the humbling truth hidden in the evidence we have explored tonight. We are not special. We are not the first civilization to reach this level of advancement. We are just the latest in a cycle that has repeated at least 6 times before, and possibly many more times than that. Think about what that means. Every achievement we celebrate, every invention we consider revolutionary, every discovery we think makes us unique, someone has done it before. Built pyramids, mapped the stars, understood the precession of the equinoxes, created precision instruments, possibly even achieved flight, electricity, and technologies we are only beginning to imagine. And they are gone, completely erased, so thoroughly destroyed that we debate whether they even existed. That should terrify you, because if it happened to them, it can happen to us. But there is another side to this realization. We are not starting from zero. We are recovering, rediscovering, remembering. The knowledge encoded in ancient monuments, preserved in mystery schools, hidden in mythology, it is all there waiting for us to decode. Free energy research that gets suppressed? The ancients may have already solved it. The pyramids show evidence of being energy devices, not tombs. Acoustic levitation that seems impossible? The ancient builders may have used it routinely. Consciousness studies that mainstream science dismisses? Ancient cultures understood the power of frequency, resonance, and human potential in ways we are just beginning to explore. We are on the verge of a renaissance. Not because we are inventing new things, but because we are finally recovering what was lost 12,000 years ago. But here is the critical question. If we are in a cycle, and this cycle has repeated multiple times before, what breaks the pattern? The answer is awareness. Every previous civilization seems to have been caught off guard. They reached their peak and assumed they were invincible. They ignored the warnings. They dismissed the idea that catastrophe could come for them, and when it did, they were unprepared. We have an advantage they did not have. We have their warnings, carved in stone, written in stars, preserved in myths. They tried to tell us what was coming, and for the first time in this cycle, we might actually be listening. The geological evidence is undeniable. We are at the same point in the 26,000-year precession cycle as the last catastrophic reset, 12,800 years ago. Something devastated civilization number 4, and we are approaching that same cosmic alignment right now. The magnetic poles are shifting. The North Magnetic Pole has moved over 1,000 miles in the last century, and the rate of movement is accelerating. This is not normal. This is what happens when Earth's magnetic field weakens, which is exactly what occurs at these transition points in the cycle. Solar activity is increasing. The Sun operates on an approximately 12,000-year cycle. Researchers like Ben Davidson have documented evidence that the Sun periodically produces micronovas, massive energy releases that can strip planetary atmospheres, cause crustal displacement, and trigger rapid climate change. And we are due. Elite bunkers. Why are billionaires and governments building massive underground facilities? Why the sudden interest in Mars colonization? Why are seed vaults being constructed in the Arctic? They know something. They are reading the same geological data. They see the patterns. And they are preparing. But preparation is not just about bunkers and survival supplies. It is about preserving knowledge. That is what the ancients tried to do. They built monuments that would survive. They encoded information in stone. They created oral traditions and mystery schools to keep critical knowledge alive. We need to do the same, not just for ourselves, but for whoever comes after if the worst happens. The internet will not survive a global catastrophe. Digital storage degrades. Cloud servers need electricity and maintenance, but stone endures. Principles encoded in geometry survive. Knowledge passed through initiation and teaching can outlast any technology. There is also an esoteric interpretation that many find compelling. What if we have lived through these cycles before, not just as a species, but as individuals? What if reincarnation is real, and the reason these ancient sites feel familiar is because we built them in previous lives? Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, archetypal symbols and memories shared by all humanity. What if that is not metaphorical? What if it is literal racial memory, the accumulated experience of millions of humans who have lived through multiple cycles, carrying fragments of knowledge forward in their unconscious minds? That would explain déjà vu, spontaneous knowledge, the feeling of recognition when you visit ancient sites, the sense that you have been here before, done this before, known this before, not because you read about it, but because you lived it. This is not just history, this is remembering. And if that is true, then breaking the cycle is not just about physical preparation, it is about spiritual evolution, consciousness expansion, learning the lessons we failed to learn last time, becoming the civilization that finally gets it right. The ancients left us messages, they left us tools, they left us warnings, and they left us hope. Because if they went to the trouble of encoding all this knowledge in stone, in stars, in stories, they believed we could do better. They believed we could break the pattern. The question is whether they were right, whether we are wise enough, humble enough, awake enough to learn from their mistakes. The clock is ticking, the cycle is turning, and very soon we will find out if we are different, or if we are just going to become the next layer of ruins for civilization number 8 to dig up and wonder about. We started tonight in a museum vault, a forgotten room filled with artifacts that do not fit the narrative, objects that should not exist, evidence of knowledge that ancient people were not supposed to have. And now, after 2 hours of evidence, geological, architectural, genetic, mythological, technological, you understand why that vault exists, why certain artifacts are labeled origin unknown and locked away from public view, why questions about our true history are dismissed before they are even investigated, because the truth is too disruptive, too world-changing, too dangerous to everything our current society is built upon. The truth is simple. We are not the first advanced civilization on Earth. We are not even the second or third. We are civilization number 7, the 7th attempt by humanity to rise from primitive survival to technological sophistication, the 7th culture to build cities, develop science, explore the cosmos, and believe we are special. And like the 6 before us, we are approaching the end of our cycle. The evidence is overwhelming. Structures built with impossible precision before civilization supposedly existed. Maps showing coastlines that have been underwater for 12,000 years. Genetic bottlenecks proving humanity nearly went extinct multiple times. Flood myths in every culture describing the same catastrophic reset. Technologies appearing in the archaeological record millennia before they should exist. And monuments encoded with astronomical knowledge requiring thousands of years of observation. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. There was an advanced global civilization during the last ice age. They had maritime capability, astronomical knowledge, sophisticated engineering, and possibly technologies we are only now rediscovering. And approximately 12,800 years ago, they were destroyed, wiped out by cosmic impacts, massive flooding, climate catastrophe, and geological upheaval. The survivors scattered. Some fled to mountains, some to islands. Some crossed oceans to find refuge on distant shores, and they tried to preserve what they could. They built monuments to encode knowledge. They taught primitive post-catastrophe humans the basics of civilization. They became the gods and culture bearers of mythology, and they created mystery schools and oral traditions to keep fragments of advanced knowledge alive. We are the inheritors of that fractured legacy, rebuilding, rediscovering, slowly piecing together what was lost. And for 12,000 years, we have been climbing back toward the level of advancement that civilization number 4 achieved. We are almost there. In some ways, we have already surpassed them. In other ways, we are still catching up. But here is what matters most. We are at the same point in the cosmic cycle where the last reset occurred. The precession of the equinoxes has brought us back to the same astronomical alignment. The solar cycle is peaking. The magnetic poles are shifting. The geological and cosmic conditions that destroyed them are converging again. And we have a choice. We can ignore the warnings, dismiss the evidence, continue believing we are special, invincible, beyond the reach of cosmic cycles and planetary catastrophe. We can assume that modern technology makes us immune to the forces that destroyed every previous civilization. We can do what they did and face the same fate. Or we can learn, We can acknowledge that the ancients were not primitive, that they were us, just earlier in the cycle. We can decode the messages they left in stone. We can preserve knowledge in ways that will survive catastrophe. We can prepare, not just physically, but spiritually, becoming conscious of the patterns, breaking the cycle of arrogance and amnesia. The monuments are still speaking. The stars are still aligned to show us the cycles. The myths are still being told. The evidence is all around us, waiting for anyone willing to look with open eyes and an open mind. This documentary is part of that awakening, one voice among many trying to cut through the suppression, the dismissal, the institutional resistance to truth, because the time for denial is over. The evidence is too strong, the patterns too clear, the cycle too far advanced. You cannot unsee what you have seen tonight. The museum vault, the impossible structures, the genetic scars, the encoded knowledge, the global patterns, the warnings carved in stone. Now you know, we are not the seventh civilization because we are lucky or chosen. We are the seventh civilization because this is what humanity does. We rise, we build, we forget, we fall, and we rise again. The question is whether this time we remember, whether we learn, whether we become the civilization that finally breaks the cycle. The ancients believed we could. That is why they left us the messages. That is why they encoded the knowledge. That is why they went to such extraordinary lengths to make sure we would find it. They were betting on us, hoping that civilization number 7 would be different, that we would be wise enough to see the pattern, humble enough to learn from their fate, and strong enough to do what they could not. Rest well tonight knowing you are part of something ancient and eternal, a cycle that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years, a story written in stone and stars and DNA. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will see the world differently. The pyramids are not tombs, the myths are not fantasies, the impossible artifacts are not hoaxes, they are evidence. Evidence that we have been here before, and evidence that we have a chance to do better this time. If we have the courage to remember, if this has changed the way you see history, leave a comment below and let me know which piece of evidence convinced you most. Share this with someone who is ready to question everything they have been taught. And if you want to go even deeper into the mysteries they do not want us to know, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because next time, we are exploring what is really hidden beneath the Antarctic ice. And trust me, that story is even stranger than what we covered tonight. Until then, sleep well, dream of ancient skies and forgotten worlds. And remember, you are not just watching history, you are remembering it.